we go. And on the left, we have the former Labour Party spokesman, James Matthewson. And on the right, we have James Price, former Conservative Special Advisor. So nice to see you both. Thank you for taking the time. I'm going to start with you, James Matthewson, down the line. Let's talk about yet another set of freebies for Keir Starmer. It now turns out that he's got another £16,000 worth of clothes from Lord Alli. These clothes were miscategorised when they were put down. I think they were put down as office supplies or something. They certainly weren't put down as clothes. So now that is a total of £36,000 worth of clothes. We've also got the £20,000 worth of accommodation in the £18 million penthouse, which a lot of people are saying is completely undervalued, actually, because a penthouse in Covent Garden during the summer months, you pay an awful lot more than £20,000. Can he survive this? Because it's the story isn't going away, and it's certainly getting to the point now where people are starting to legitimately question, A, whether he'll survive this, or B, whether there is something dodgy going on here, without going into any detail, that we're not being told. What do you think?
Yeah, it's certainly frustrating for the Labour Party, certainly frustrating for the government, because it's not what they want to be talking about at all at this stage. They've got a very clear plan on what they would like to be talking about and what they would like, how they would like the media coverage to be structured at the moment with regard to policy announcements and where they are in the lead up to the budget, especially, and this kind of sensible and, kind of responsible imagery that they want to put forward about, the economy and how they're managing that with Rachel Reeves suspended and all the rest of it. So it's not at all the image that they want to cultivate. However, saying that, I mean, talking to people at Labour Party conference, talking to some government staffers recently, and I don't think they're taking this carelessly at all. I mean, they are concerned about it and they are monitoring it, but I just don't see them as being particularly bothered in the long run about the cut through, because the idea is that the story can only run for so long. Now, that is until things keep coming out, as they seem to be doing. But the way these stories often are is that they're being briefed by people, they're being staggered, they're being drip-fed in certain ways that they continues to have legs. But I just don't see it having the damage, speaking to people, ordinary people as well, who, either voted Labour or didn't vote Labour. The people who seem to be obsessed with it, obviously, are the people opposed to the Labour Party and the media who dislike the Labour Party or take a general critical view of the Labour Party anyway. So, of course, you will have the coverage. Of course, we will see the criticism. But I mean, do
you think then that this is the outrage is just confined to the media or those people who don't like Labour? I mean, it sounds like you're implying there that perhaps Labour are getting a particularly tough time from the media. Is that perhaps the Conservatives wouldn't have got? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know that quarters, of course, that's how our media works. You've got pro-Conservative media, you've got pro-Labour media. The pro-Labour media isn't giving Labour a hard time over this. The pro-Conservative media is. It was the opposite with the Conservative Party, of course. So I think it kind of balances out a lot of the time. I mean, whoever you ask will always say, anybody on the left will say that the media is right-wing. Anybody on the right will say the media is left-wing. So, I think it generally balances out. But what I mean is that you would think the outrage would spread if you were looking at the press purely alone based on the anger in the press. You would think the outrage was across the UK. From what I've seen and what I've heard in the Leader's office, who are paying very close attention to polling and to views on doorsteps, it doesn't seem to be cutting through in the way that you would think.
I think I don't know, James Price, I'll let you respond, but the polling for Keir Starmer has put him less popular than Rishi Sunak at the moment. So, I mean, I don't know whether James Price, former Conservative Special Advisor, what James Matthewson is saying is particularly true. But does he have a fair point in saying, well, look, maybe they're just die-hard Conservatives. Maybe it's just the right-wing press that cares about this. Out in the country, people don't.
I would love it if the Labour Party continues to think that, because it's shown already that it's so out of touch with what's actually going on. Look, hands up, the Conservative Party made a massive, massive series of errors, and we lost that last election. No way did the Labour Party win that last election. It was kind of by default, and I think a lot of people realise that. The only ones who seemingly don't are Keir Starmer, who keeps talking about this massive mandate that he has been given. It's only taken, 3 months for him to become less popular than Rishi Sunak now, and that is itself an extraordinary thing. Tony Blair Blair's honeymoon lasted, 3 years? Starmer's has barely lasted 3 months to be this unpopular this soon, and it's how tone-deaf it all feels. Starmer's first day in office, he stood in front of Number 10 and said, this is a government of public service, and it's a government that's going to tread a little more lightly on your lives. Well, fast forward to his conference speech, and he starts saying the state is taking back control over your life, and that in terms of public service, well, the only public service seems to be the fact that he's been letting Lord Alli, this chap who's been buying him all these clothes, his wife all these clothes, he's given this guy a pass into Downing Street to host other donors in the Downing Street garden. You know, these things are extraordinary, and it does cut through. £32,000. I mean, that's a decent salary in lots of parts of this country, and it's all going on clothes and fancy glasses and things like that. It's not being registered properly, as you said. It's being registered as office supplies, as has Angela Reynolds and as has Rachel Reeves. So they know it's dodgy.
James Matthewson, I mean, you must. I don't know if I buy the fact that £32,000 worth of clothes, as James Price just pointed out, which is someone's salary, perhaps in an area of the Red Wall. Maybe it's much more than someone's salary around there. You don't think that's going to have cut through with them saying, well, actually, this shows the most immense privilege that this person's wardrobe that they got for free is more than a salary I could ever hope to earn?
I don't think there's a huge amount of cut through with it. Of course we're seeing outrage about it. Of course we're seeing anger about it in the press. And by the way, I'm not defending it. I'm not saying that it's entirely right or that I agree with it. It's not the system I would like to see in place at all. But the arrogance for the Conservative Party to think that not only did they lose the election, but Labour didn't win the election. That's interesting, isn't it? There wasn't that talk when Boris Johnson won his mandate. And there wasn't this talk either when Boris Johnson was getting everything paid for by every single pal he ever went to school with. So, you know, it's strange, isn't it? The duality that's at play here. And of course, that's party politics. But I just do not think in communities like the community I come from, the northeast of England, yes, people look at it and they laugh and they have they roll their eyes and all the rest of it. But we are early into a 5-year term of this government. Whether the Tories like it or not, there is a full 5-year term.
All right, listen, we're going to come back to you. We've got to take a quick break, but we'll get your response to that, whether it really is having that cut through, as we say. Hey, as well, just very quickly, send me a message. If you voted Labour at the last election, well, take a deep breath and ask yourself a few questions. But then once you've done that, genuinely, quite seriously, are you listening to all this thinking, well, maybe I made a mistake? Or is this all just a storm in a teacup? Maybe you think that this isn't actually as big a story as it's being made out. James Matthewson just referenced the dodgy Conservative donation, but once again sort of said that there's a lot of eye-rolling about all of this with Keir Starmer and having more clothes, £32,000 worth. That's aside from the money that his wife got. That's aside from also the £18 million penthouse flat, which does seem to fail the sniff test. But is it just eye-rolly among the Labour voters, do you think? And the Conservatives are relishing this, when in actual fact, you lot were quite dodgy with some of your donations as well, weren't you?
Look, by the way, I'd be very happy if anybody wanted to donate to any cause that I was doing. It's not going to affect my judgment or change the kind of things that I would say, unlike perhaps why it is that Lord Alli keeps giving all this money. And it turned out yesterday that he started lobbying in favour of Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, which is just an extraordinary thing. I don't think anybody had that on their scandal bingo, did they? But look, if this really is just a storm in a teacup and the public aren't paying attention to the fact that the Prime Minister on £160,000 a year can't afford to pay for clothes for his own wife, whilst also taking away winter fuel payments for pensioners on 13k and not realising why that's a big deal, then the fall in his popularity so precipitously. He's gone from being more popular than Rishi Sunak by a decent way to being less popular than Rishi Sunak. Why is that? If it's not about the donations to the clothes, as my namesake keeps saying, it must be the fact the public is even more switched on to the many, many, many other failures that Labour has already made in office. The fact that they've been releasing prisoners incorrectly who've then gone on to go and recommit offences again, and some of the people they've released they shouldn't have released. The fact that they're going to be wrecking the school system by adding a load of tax onto these private schools that's mostly going to affect kids with special educational needs and disabilities. The fact that their policy on non-DOMs is actually going to cost more money because wealthy people who invest loads of money in the UK are now going to leave and take that money with them, making even less money for the NHS and the health service. I could go on and on. Maybe those are the reasons why Starmer is already so unpopular.
James Matthewson, I mean, that is a fair point regarding optics and regarding hypocrisy. If you are going to take winter fuel payments from pensioners who earn or receive an incredibly small amount of money, yet on £160,000 not be able to buy your own clothes. It may be within the rules, but it's outright hypocrisy. If you are going to remove someone who would be deemed to be in a privileged position from paying for their son or daughter to have a better education and penalise them for doing that whilst using your privilege to procure an £18 million flat for your son to study in, therefore being hypocritical. That's the issue here. It's the hypocrisy of the school VAT. It's the hypocrisy of the winter fuel payment. All of that is saying to the electorate, I am not going to live by the standards my policies are inflicting on you.
Yeah, and I mentioned the frustration in the Labour Party. That's frustration that everybody feels and that I feel myself. I think what's happened, in my personal opinion here, is that they've come in, they've been naive, there's been a huge amount of excitement about winning an election, about taking these positions of power and influence, and the rules that are set up and that exist there, and the practices that have always been used in years previous, that happen all around the globe, that happen in previous, governments in the UK, they've just ran with, and they've said, okay, well, this is obviously the rules, this is fine, and there's not been that judgment there to stop and assess this, and this is part of why there is a huge briefing row going on in Downing Street at the moment between Sue Gray, and Morgan McSweeney in Keir Starmer's
But James, just to jump in though, can you still, as a Labour Party spokesman, defend the VAT on schools and defend the cutting of the winter fuel allowance in the context of what we've learned in the last couple of weeks about the way in which Keir Starmer conducts his affairs? Do you still defend those two policies?
Yes, entirely. And I'm not a Labour Party spokesman. I'm a former Labour Party spokesman.
I know that. As a former Labour Party spokesman, I thought I said that.
Which means I've got no skin in the game. I've got no stake.
Yeah, so how can you still defend? Because many people listening to this would think, okay, well, you are someone who is on the left, formerly a spokesperson of Labour. How can this person possibly still defend the cutting of winter fuel payments and the austerity that will be created by putting more pupils into a state school system that's already saturated in some areas? How can you defend that when the leader of the party who is overseeing those policies does not live by those standards?
Because they're not tied together, the two. Those policies are policies on their own, alone, and they're good policies. And they're policies that many people disagree with. Yourselves, it sounds like you disagree with them, that's fine. But we can have a debate about that. We can have a debate about those policies. The optics, and this is where the frustration comes from, of this row around the clothing, which is why the Conservatives are leaning into it, because they know exactly that it creates this element and this vision of hypocrisy. But we should be able to move past that now. We should be able to say, okay, well, that's been done.
Why do we have to move past this?
Okay, it's a vision of hypocrisy.
Why do we move past everything? Everything that you've mentioned, James, which fascinates me, every single thing that you've mentioned was something of your causing in government. You mentioned the prisons and the fact that Labour have had to release prisoners. What were you going to do about it? You were just going to leave them in the state that they were in? They were going to have a complete breakdown of law and order. And then SEND provision and private schools having to pick up the slack because SEND provision has been underfunded through austerity for the last 14 years. I mean, these are things that you caused in government.
All right, James Matthewson.
Who's going to deal with it?
So a couple of things there. You caused the problems, firstly, the Conservative side, that Labour are now sorting out. But secondly, there's no link between the conduct of the Prime Minister overseeing the policies needing to live by the rules that those policies instill in others.
Let's try and actually put these things together then, right? So Starmer, as everybody knows, is a lawyer and loves the rules and thinks that because he's abided by all these rules, everything is absolutely fine. What people tend to realise is that the rules, whether it's rules around donations or whether it's rules about how the country has been governed for a long time, are the big problem. And by not being able to think creatively and think outside the box, all of these problems have been building up. Whether that's the fact that Starmer isn't able to declare all these things and the huge amounts of money that he's been getting. And by the way, not just since taking office, he's been getting these donations for years and years and fibbing about this office, this flat being his home during COVID and putting up family pictures behind him to pretend and all that kind of muck that's been going around. But let's look at something like prisons. Starmer comes in and goes, the only thing we can do now, because there is a legitimate problem, as James says, with prisons and the number of people in prisons, the number of spaces, we're just going to release violent criminals. No. either party, both parties should say, no, let's just build some more prisons. We had Nightingale hospitals in COVID. Why don't we go and do this? It happened in the Isle of Man. It happened in 1980. We had a bill for this. So this has been done before. And I can hear the derisory laughter because the idea of, let's actually do something to fix a problem. No. Let's take an easy route out and just release violent criminals back into the streets. That's the Labour policy.
James, you laughed at that comment. When we return, we'll find out what tickled you so much about that, and that'll be in a moment. So, James, you were just very tickled, James Matthewson, at what James Price said about the idea of solving the prisons crisis by building more prisons, or perhaps not even doing that. We repurposed military bases when it came to migrants coming over. Could we not have repurposed them very quickly to have made them suitable for low security tagged prisoners? Could we not have done what we did with Nightingale hospitals and got up some temporary prisons again for the lower security prisoners, the lower prisoners who have the lowest threat? Could we not have done something like that rather than literally releasing them to the point where they were having champagne on the doorstep of the prison, or wrongly releasing them and going on and committing the wrong sorts of crimes?
Yeah, the reason I was tickled, as you put it, is because it just fascinates me that the motivation all of a sudden from James to deal with this, to move heaven and earth, to deal with this issue, to build new prisons, to build Nightingale hospital versions of Britain. Why weren't you doing that? Why weren't the Conservatives doing that? Why didn't that happen? This issue doesn't appear overnight. It came from years and years of mismanagement in the Department of Justice, and it didn't just build up.
But that doesn't justify a bad decision now. I think everyone here, including I'm sure you, James, will agree the Conservatives didn't do enough to solve the problem, but that doesn't mean to say that a bad decision to attempt to solve the problem is justified because the problem hadn't been solved properly before. It's still a bad decision.
No, but it suggests that the intention behind all of a sudden the suggestions that we can fix this overnight are entirely party political and tribal, and they're not about actually solutions that could be implemented. The Department for Justice wants to solve this problem. There is no interest in it not doing so, even politically. It needs to solve this problem. It needs to solve this problem.
How do you solve it by releasing people wrongly?
If it thought that the solution to that was being able to build quickly and build efficiently and build safely and securely, but we would be having this debate anyway. We'd be having a debate about misspending on hospitals, on prisons that were going to be shoddy and not used like the Nightingale hospitals. You know, so there's always the flip side. So they're trying to do their best with the situation. They've taken an extreme decision.
The government's trying to do their best. So it's okay that these people who have been criminals who've been wrongly released have gone on to commit crimes up to an hour or so after being released. So it's fine. They're doing their best. Look, again, when you're in government, it is difficult. When you're in government, it's difficult. The Tories were in government for a long time. Friends of mine who'd worked, and it's actually the Ministry of Justice. The Department of Justice is in America. The Ministry of Justice, they're trying to do these things, and it's hard to fix the plane while it's in the air. The Labour Party had all this time out of government to work out these plans, have come in without a single clue as to what's going on. So you look at something like the winter fuel payment, that is something, when I was in the Treasury, it was put to us, when every Chancellor gets this, the Treasury officials want to get rid of winter fuel payments, and there are reasonable economic reasons for doing it. But every Chancellor comes along and goes, should I be taking money away from pensioners who therefore will die of cold over winter? That's maybe a bad idea in the political term and in a human moral term, and they say no. The fact that Rachel Reeves has gone into this, and Starmer too, and they've walked into every political trap and every tripwire going, with the end result being that some pensioners will die of freezing to death over winter, shows they haven't got a single clue, a single thought in terms of preparation, and it shows right across the board. And that's why Keir Starmer is really already less popular than Rishi Sunak, and why he's messing up on all these things, because perhaps he's too busy wondering what to ask Lord Alli on his wish list next.
James Matthewson, I mean, it is unbelievable that they opposed when the Conservatives were mooting the idea of getting rid of the winter fuel allowance. They opposed it so vociferously. There's literally tweets that you could come up with saying how awful it would be, the choice between heating and eating. Also, another story today on something that they opposed in Labour's Keir Starmer wish list of 10 pledges, which was quietly deleted from his website after he became Labour leader. He said that he would abolish tuition fees. Now we hear that he's actually going to be putting them up with inflation. So again, you know, this sort of pious indignation at Conservative policies that they are now bringing in themselves.
Yeah, I totally disagree with the whole situation around the winter fuel payment thing. James is right on that. You know, they shouldn't be doing this, and there is a choice, and it's a political choice at the end of the day.
Are they penalising pensioners for not voting Labour because they were the demographic that were the least likely to vote Labour?
I mean, they were the least likely to vote Labour, but that's different across the country. Many.
No. If you look at the YouGov did polling of 35,000 pensioners, I think the week before last, and they found that it was over 60 and then over 65. The number who actually voted Labour was incredibly low in comparison to other demographics. So surely Labour are just saying, well, they're disposable.
No, in comparison to every other demographic, but not, you know, across the country. Every pensioner that I know in my family voted Labour, and that's just cultural. That's just different parts of the country. So I don't think it's about...
But across the country as an average, I mean, of course, you're right. There are going to be pockets of the country where pensioners voted Labour, but if you look at the data across the United Kingdom, I think the pensioners are the least likely. The party that got the fewest votes from pensioners is Labour. So surely Labour have cynically looked at this and thought, well, we don't care about pensioners, they don't vote for us.
No, they don't do that. And I would hope James would agree with me that nobody sits in the Treasury and thinks, you know, oh, they didn't vote for us, let's stuff them. You know, that's not how anybody who fights hard... That's not how anybody who fights hard to get elected to try and improve people's lives with different opinions on how to do so, by the way, would ever operate. So let's hope that that's not the case.
Sorry, James, you don't think people within the Treasury or any other government department sit down and say, right, this policy might affect a massive amount of people of a demographic that voted for us, so we either will or won't bring it in. I mean, surely that's like politics, page one, paragraph one.
Let's look at what happened under the Blair government. Who were the first people they started going after? It was fox hunting. Not exactly a major issue, but who are the people who go fox hunting? All the Tories in the countryside that didn't vote for Labour. And then what do they do after that? Peter Mandelson was on the record as saying, we're going to use mass migration to rub the right's noses in multiculturalism and opening to a floodgate of people moving into this country over decades that's completely changed the country. Of course, the Labour Party makes political decisions when it's in office.
But surely the Conservatives do the same as well, right?
Yeah, you know, when you have marginal seats, you know, George Osborne was very good at this. I guess this is a marginal seat here. Maybe more funding will end up going to those places. But what you're doing then is showing people the benefit of voting for that party, rather than promising the world, saying we're going to make everything wonderful, we're going to abolish tuition fees, we're going to bring back sunshine and save the world and make everything free and cheap. Come into office, realise, oh my God, politics is actually quite difficult. Politics is quite difficult. We're going to have to ruin the country for everybody, which is what's already happening.
Nick Clegg said, whilst in coalition, that he sat with George Osborne and David Cameron and said, oh, fantastic, you know, we've had a change in the growth figures, we can start building council houses again, to which both of them laughed and said, you can't build council houses, that's where Labour voters live.
Well, there we go. So you're proving the point that politicians, whatever their party might be, they look at demographics of who voted for them and then they favour policies in favour of them.
That anybody in the Treasury would think that something would kill people and then still do it, I think is hugely alarming, and I don't believe, even from the Conservatives, and I've defended Conservatives in this over the years, from, you know, many of my friends on the left.
Just come up with an example of Conservatives that have done just that, though.
But I'm talking about...
But Labour don't do it. It's different when Labour do it because they're the goodies, which justifies them being able to do all these terrible things that hurt people.
Go on, James Matthewson.
If you give me a moment to defend Conservatives for a second, James, so what I would say is that, like, I don't believe that there is anybody who's elected into these positions who is trying to cause harm to the British electorate actively. That's just not, I think, you know, how these people operate. When I've worked with them closely, and you know, when I give those examples, I don't give the example of somebody causing a policy that would kill people.
All right.
I disagree with the policy.
James,
I don't agree with that.
Thank you, James Matthewson, former Labour Party spokesman, James Price, former Conservative Special Advisor. So there we go. Politicians don't look at demographics when it comes to the policy that they're going to be bringing in, which might be harmful.
I didn't even feel the need to interrupt.
I can't believe you've ever been so quiet. I've never heard it.